In last night's match at the Emirates, this was Manchester United's 0-0 draw with Arsenal. Another fine mess for Ole, says the back page headline. United flat once again, but boss Solskjaer is happy, is the Sunday World verdict. On the Sun then, back page, Keano lets rip. That was Roy Keane, he was on Sky Sports obviously after the 0-0 draw, said Manchester United frightened to challenge for the title was his verdict. And then also in the Sun they have shock twist in Super League saga. So new claims that the Glazers and Henry of Liverpool, John Henry, are pushing ahead with plans for a European Super League. And then the front page, interesting this, so the BBC tomorrow are airing their panorama investigation into Daniel Kinahan. Kinahan on the ropes is the headline here on the front page of the Sun. Kinahan on the ropes. BBC programme to probe Kinahan, and then inside page 4 and 5. It says the wannabe boxing promoter is the subject of a panorama show tomorrow. And the point is being made on the front page here by an investigator into Kinahan that all of the noise around him will be brought to a massive UK audience is the point. So it's Stephen Breen inside page 4 and 5. Daniel Kinahan battling to save his position as a powerhouse in the world of boxing ahead of BBC expose is how they open it. And it would seem, they say, that the Panorama team started working on the project after Tyson Fury praised Kinahan very publicly. You might remember that on his Instagram after fight was organised. He gave big thanks to Daniel Kinahan, Tyson Fury did, and it was that which prompted the Panorama investigation. I think that was the first time a UK audience really had become aware of Kinahan. Fine Gael TD here, Neil Richmond, is quoted saying it's must watch for anyone who is prepared to do business with MTK and Kinahan in the future. The UK's boxing regulators and TV companies need to be aware of who he really is. Ignorance can be no excuse. So that sounds like it's worth watching tomorrow evening, that Panorama investigation on BBC. I suspect we'll talk about that during the week. Sunday Independent then, back to Manchester United. United grinding to a halt. Probably captures the mood, I suspect, for Manchester United fans right now. It's been a bad week. And beneath that, good news for Andy Farrell. Tyke Furlong here. Furlong makes return as Leinster storm to top of table. Scarlets 25, Leinster 52 at Parky Scarlets last night in the top 14. So Tyke Furlong safe and sound into Irish camp. Hadn't played since February 2020, so that is a huge boost. The Mail then, we will take our players. This is going to blow up, I think, come March time. Brazil step up country versus club row over World Cup quarantine in title race. Effectively, come March time, obviously, international fixtures will kick off and South American players will be called up, and that will mean quarantining on their return. So there's a red list which requires travellers to quarantine in a hotel for 10 days. Crucially, says James Sharp here, there are no legal provisions to exempt elite sports people at this time. So Brazil, for instance, play Argentina in March. I suspect they'll figure it out. They'll put in some kind of exemption closer to the time. Or not, we'll see. It'll be a row if they don't. Sunday Mirror then, they go with Bielsa blast. Leeds in action today, but he was talking in his pre-match press conference about Frank Lampard, saying English football has been a world leader in allowing managers time to develop their projects. It has clearly stopped doing so. Well, and Chelsea stopped doing so some time ago, to be fair. And then the Sunday Times sports section, they have a picture of Jesus scoring for Manchester City yesterday. Man City moved 3 points clear now. They're in good shape, City. They're 3 points clear, and they have a game in hand over Manchester United after results yesterday. And beneath that, Doyle. This is Kevin Doyle. He's interviewed inside, but some of his comments make the front page. Time for Stephen Kennedy to end nicey tactics. Happy to say we're joined by Timmy McCarthy, former Irish basketball player and coach, commentator at various Olympic Games for RTE. And Gráinne McElwain is with us as well, broadcaster with TG Cahir, Sky Sports, amongst others. You're both very welcome. How are you doing?
Morning, Joe. Morning, Timmy.
Morning, Gráinne. Morning, Joe. Good to be here.
Great to have you with us. Now, on somebody's feed, it sounds like it's lashing rain. I don't know, how are our microphones doing? Give me a hello there.
Hello,
Hi,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. think that's okay,
Hi,
Neil,
Joe.
is it?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. The joys of 2021. We'll just have to, we'll muck on through, we'll be okay. What about that on the front page then, the Kevin Doyle comment, time for Kenny to end nicey tactics. There's a fuller interview inside, I know it caught both your eye, but for instance, he's calling on Stephen Kenny to bring Robbie Keane in from what is effectively gardening leave, well-paid gardening leave as well, and he's called for an end to nicey tactics. Ireland have scored 1 goal in 8 internationals and are yet to win with Kenny in charge. So Kevin Doyle is saying it makes perfect sense to bring Robbie Keane in. I mean, he may be forgetting Robbie Keane was in under Mick McCarthy, Gráinne, and that wasn't so good either in front of goal. I don't think Robbie Keane's necessarily the solution, especially if Stephen Kenny doesn't want him.
No, he's not. But I suppose his point is he's being paid by the FAI as it is at the moment. So possibly the experience that he is arguably Ireland's best ever goal scorer. So it's like, why have you him sitting on the sideline when he could come in and maybe do some work and help the Irish team at the moment, because we have a problem there in scoring goals at the moment. So I think from the article here, I'm just trying to find it now where I have it, but I think from the article that he said as well, it's obviously he's a really great friendship with Robbie Keane as well. He's somebody that he really respects and admires. And I suppose he feels that he could add something to the Irish setup. So I suppose he's just putting that question out there. Maybe it's time to bring Robbie back in, but I think it's been quite clear as well that Stephen Kenny does not want him, or else he will be in at this stage too.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't want him, exactly, is the point. Tim, any views on that?
Yeah, I spoke about this, Joe, previously with yourselves on the Sunday paper review. I love what Stephen Kenny is doing. I absolutely think it's a brilliant style of football that we're trying to play. The problem we have is we don't have Robbie Keane as the player. I'd bring Robbie Keane back if he was 15 years younger and could play centre forward. But, we just don't have the talent. I thought Kevin Doyle's point about Southgate's remark that, he expected Ireland to be more physical. And, we need to get away from that. Like, that type of football, got us nowhere ultimately. It got us to some championships, but we never competed really in the championship other than 1990 and 88, which was, generations ago. So I love what Kenny's trying to do. We just don't have the talent. I think that we've got to realise that we have players in the championship and lower divisions playing international football for us. And we don't have the talent. We don't have a goal scorer like Keane, in his pomp, because whatever people say about him, he scored goals for fun internationally. So I just think that, we need to stick with Kenny. We need to give him the chance. We need to bring on some of the younger players. And, it may be a case that we'll talk about Lampard later about projects and stuff, but, we've got to be realistic. We're an average team. We have a footballing style now that's, that I enjoy, that I think that is the way football should be played. So for me, forget the physicality. Let's play football, and hopefully we'll unearth, one of these youngsters to come in and get some goals for us.
It's really interesting, Joe, kind of across all the papers that I've been reading this morning, is this inexperience and this idea of giving people a chance or whether to give them time. It's kind of been a theme in a lot of the players, and Timmy just mentioned there, about Frank Lampard. We're going to be talking about Steven Gerrard, like lots of different things. Andy Farrell as well, like, do you give people time? Do you allow them the time to do something? Which Stephen Kenny, pressure already, they're talking about some of the papers too, like he has to do well in this next upcoming campaign. And if he doesn't, well, people are going to want to see the back of him. But do you give him time? Like, I think that's a question that a lot of, and that we need to ask, and that organisations need to ask, and to give people time to actually embed a style of play. And if we want to move forward in a different way, we need to give Stephen Kenny time to do that.
Yeah, well, Kevin Doyle says here, to give you the quote, as well as saying bring in Robbie Keane, he says, teams have to hate playing against us. I would say that every team in the world would love playing against us when we play like we're playing now. It's all nicey, and we get loads of passes. We've more possession, but we never laid a finger on any of the teams we played against. There's a certain truth in it. We're going to have to get a bit more dangerous with all this possession. I'm sure Stephen Kenny knows that as much as anybody. He's he's working on it. It was probably the most difficult 8 games you can imagine with COVID and everything else, which afflicted the squad.
I would say, Joe, if you look at the games, though, we created a lot of chances. Yeah. Even with the amount of passing we did create chances. We just don't have the talent to take them right now. So, what do we do? Punt it long? When you think of the team we had in Jack Charles' area, which was the most successful era we had in Irish football, we had an incredibly talented group of players. We just don't have that level of talent now. And you go back to that team, you had Ronnie Whelan, you had Paul McGrath, you had David O'Leary, Mark Lawrence, and, you know, I mean, just to name a few. I mean, you had Niall Quinn and Aldridge scoring up front. So, you know, we just don't have that. But I think we create chances. And I think that if we had a Robbie Keane right now in this team, he'd be scoring for fun with the chance that we have created.
On Robbie Keane, by the way, so reported wages of $250,000 a year from the FAI, which has huge debts. Shouldn't something be done here? And maybe Robbie Keane or the FAI, whoever, should initiate it and say, look, this is not obviously working out for either of us. Let's end this, because $250,000 going for nothing is no good to anybody. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have thoughts that he has a contract and they negotiated it. And if I was Robbie Keane, you know, I'd adhere to my contract. From the FAI's point of view.
Well, sorry, Timmy, would you? Given everything Irish football might have done for you in your life, would you adhere to the contract, yeah?
Well, see, if you look at their careers, they're just looking at it as professionals. So I don't think that there's this emotional attachment, would be my view, you know, from a Robbie Keane and or professional players to their association. So, you know, I think Robbie Keane would stay with it, you know.
I think Robbie Keane is probably quite hurt. You know, the way it all ended, like, you know, he's someone that has been very proud of wearing the Irish shirt. I mean, he could have retired and earlier on. He didn't. He stayed around. And the way it just ended, it was a really sour way to end your setup with the Irish team. Like, you come in and it's like, you know, just looking back and paraphrasing, I think like it was kind of indirect contact that told him, well, actually, we don't want you involved in the Irish setup now under Stephen Kenny. And he kind of finds out secondhand. So I'd say he's kind of quite annoyed, actually, about how it ended. I mean, when you're talking about it's money, it's contracts, the FAI do not have a good track record in negotiating good contracts and good contract releases. I mean, they've wasted so much money over the years. So possibly from Robbie Keane's point of view, he's like, you know, if he's quite hurt about how it ended, he's not going to be in a forgiving mood to say, well, here's the money back. I mean, you would like to think that he would do that. You'd like to think if someone ends in amicable terms and they're happy with how things ended, they go, you know what, forget about that after all that we've been through. But I'd say he's quite annoyed and quite possibly angry and disappointed about how it all ended. And that possibly could be one of the reasons why he isn't going to give that money back and we'll see out the contract and the FAI are going to have to pay for it.
I suspect you're right. Six Nations preview in every paper, really. It's full of look-aheads to next week and beyond. Timmy, what grabbed you? Where do you want to start?
I think we should start with Peter Riley's piece about a strong start. You know, if you think of what we're facing right now, you know, he makes a big emphasis on a strong start. He talks about, obviously, Sexton and Furlong, the importance of both of them. But he also talks about the relevance for Andy Farrell of getting a good start, and that's picked up in some other papers as well. But I think a strong start is critical for any new era, because it builds confidence externally. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff going on internally. There's no doubt there's a lot of good stuff going on internally, but it's the external stuff that really ultimately, in my experience, brings down managers, particularly at professional levels. So I liked his piece about, you know, make it very clear, we need to get a good start next week against Wales. But what I was concerned about is the importance that he placed on Sexton and Furlong, because Sexton is struggling with an injury, and Furlong, as you mentioned at the start, Joe, is just coming back after being out for a long period of time. And he came back in a Pro 12 or Pro 14 game. So it's not the same as stepping up to international. So that would concern me. But I just thought his piece nailed it. We need a strong start.
Yeah, we sure do. It's Wales first away, and then it's France in Dublin. Last time we played Wales away was 25-7 in Wales' favour. They won the Grand Slam in the rain. That was the day Ireland elected not to close the roof. It was Joe Schmidt's last Six Nations, and it was a miserable afternoon. Now, Wales are not in the place they were then, to say the least. So Peter O'Reilly makes the point, it has been suggested, and not entirely in jest, that the winning team could be the one whose players most enjoy each other's company. And given the COVID situation, I mean, even the Irish players are embarking on an 18-day bubble initially before they'll see any family or friends at the moment. So, you know, he makes the point, well before COVID, one of Andy Farrell's main preoccupations was making the atmosphere in the camp more enjoyable and less fearful than it had become under Joe Schmidt. This becomes even more important now, and I suspect it does. Both Neil Francis and Peter Riley touch on the importance of Sexton. You know, so Sexton is the picture in Peter Riley's piece. Neil Francis' piece says everything rests on Sexton's shoulders. There's an interesting statistic in Peter O'Reilly's piece, because we often go into Six Nations worrying about Johnny Sexton's health, for sure, and not least as he's got older. But he says, in the past 7 tournaments, Sexton has failed to just start 3 games. So he's played 32 of 35, and 2 of those he missed were against Italy. So in effect, they don't really count. So basically, he's pretty much played every single game of the started every single game of the Six Nations Championship over the last 7 seasons, bar one. Neil Francis basically makes the point of Sexton as well, that I can say with a reasonable degree of confidence, Ireland would have won nothing in the last 10 years if Sexton had not been around, which is a bold enough statement. So no pressure on Johnny there, Gráinne.
No, and that actually struck my eye as well, because this is the narrative that we actually kind of hear and see. And I mean, in terms of starting games, yes, but in terms of finishing games, I suppose in the latter time, he has come off a lot earlier than we all would have liked to have seen that happen. So that's another stat. But that was interesting in the Neil Francis piece as well, was that the comparisons with Tom Brady, and I'm sure Johnny Sexton at this stage is sick of ever doing an interview, because everyone's just talking about Tom Brady and what he wants to do to emulate Tom Brady and continue playing when he's 43. But it's the amount of hits, the amount of injuries. Like, Tom Brady hasn't put his body through the same amount of hits and attrition that Johnny Sexton has done as well. And I think that's the key thing for Johnny Sexton. Like, can his body hold up? And we don't know. Like, you know, and Peter has said, obviously, that he started those games, but, you know, he's 35, 30. Well, can he maintain that level of physicality? Like, because we just know how difficult these games are going to be, and how important it is for Ireland to get off to that good start. But another thing that struck me as well about that is, it's kind of when we're talking about this inexperience and these pressure on players. We spoke about Stephen Kenny, but now, you know, they're talking as well now about Andy Farrell, and you know, there's going to be questions about him, questions about David Nikifor as well, and that comes up in Peter O'Reilly's piece as well, as in, like, well, what are we going to see from them, and possibly for the first time now, if this doesn't go well for David Nikifor now, and first time in 7 years, but it's going to be serious questions being asked about him and the team that has been put together as well. And Paul O'Connell too, like, everybody's talking about what a great position on that, and getting him in as a forwards coach, and it is, of course, but he has relatively little inexperience as well. So it's kind of very similar. We're expecting so much from him because he was such an amazing player. But as we've seen in other players and that have come in and passed, it doesn't necessarily negate that you'll be brilliant at coaching and management. And this is his first year being involved. So it's going to be interesting to see the effect that he's going to have on this as well. So there's a lot of bedding in period. It's been such a difficult time for all managements and players in this COVID pandemic. They're not getting the same run of games and get-togethers that they would have had in previous years. So I think there's a lot at stake, obviously, in how Ireland play, but also in terms of that management setup and coaching setup, how they perform as well. Yeah, and both those pieces, Peter O'Reilly's and Neil Francis's, make those points. Like, Peter makes the point, Ireland do have a sympathetic schedule in terms of Wales first off. They're in dire form. And then he says France arrive on Sunday without their first choice out half in Roman Ntamak. None of their team has won a Six Nations game at the Aviva Stadium. When you put it like that, he says, suddenly that slam decider against England does not sound so fanciful. And yet, and you suspected there was an and yet coming. Do we really think of this Ireland side as title contenders? Not if you use the evidence of 2020. The building blocks of their game wobbled too often, and you sensed the coaching team still feeling its way at top level. He goes on to say later on, Peter O'Reilly, that Simon Easterby is yet to prove himself as a top-class defence coach. Mike Catt has not exactly revolutionised Ireland's attacking game, and against an aggressive rush defence of the type employed by England and France, Ireland have been woefully short on solutions. Neil Francis cuts to the core a bit more. He says, Farrell's first year as head coach, less than impressive. Strategically, I wasn't sure what the coaching ticket were trying to do. And then he just makes the comparison with the current coaching ticket versus the old one. So he said, Andy Farrell's not as good as Joe Schmidt. Simon Easterby is not as good as Andy Farrell when it comes to defence. John Fogarty is not as good as Greg Feek. Mike Catt is not as good as Stuart Lancaster or Stephen Larkham. The only unquantifiable is how good is Paul O'Connell. He goes on to say, if Farrell has Sexton and Furlong in his team, he has a chance of having a decent season. Decent season according to Peter O'Reilly then, Timmy. What constitutes a successful Six Nations for Farrell and Nucifora? It involves beating, Peter O'Reilly's verdict is, it involves beating the 3 teams ranked below Ireland, Scotland, Wales and Italy, to remain on the mezzanine level below France and England. If Ireland could go one better and beat one of the big 2, this would constitute a corner turn. So that's about where they are. Best of the rest.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I disagree with that. Yeah, I do. I strongly disagree with that because.
So, who do you? So England and he's saying England and France are the best, and Ireland are best of the rest. No.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that this Irish team, if you take the nucleus of this Irish team, 2 years ago we were talking about winning a World Cup. If you just think about going into that World Cup, you're talking about winning a World Cup, right? So we haven't become so bad overnight. Now, obviously, some players have got a bit older, but then players like James Ryan have really stepped up. So I really believe that if we get this right, we have a real chance in the Six Nations. The big question is, can we get it right? And I just think that if you take Neil Francis' piece. Yeah, and the Sexton comparison for us with people like Tom Brady, and he mentioned LeBron James, who just signed a $153 million contract. I don't think that's a fair comparison because, there's no evidence of rugby players in their late 30s able to perform at the peak, and definitely in their 40s. So there's no evidence of that. There is experience in the NBA and the NFL of players, particularly people like Brady's position and LeBron going on longer. So there's more longevity. So that's the first thing about the comparison, with Sexton. Sexton's at 36, and there's no doubt that there's a question mark about his ability to be at the peak for long periods. So we've got to protect Sexton, I believe, through this. So I thought the piece, or the stat about the fact 32 to 35 games was a fascinating stat. Secondly,
could I ask you a question? Could I ask you a question?
Yep.
How, in God's name, do you protect Johnny Sexton in rugby? There's no protecting him.
You play him less, but you play him less.
Okay, so he has to play. He has to play against Wales away. He has to start against France at home. Sure, good luck.
Okay,
protecting
but what I'm saying is, but Joe, you can. You just don't play him as long. You just don't play him as long in the game. He has to start. If he's fit, he has to start as the first team, right? Okay. So what you do is you make sure he doesn't play for Leinster. You take all those things. If you want to protect somebody at 36 years of age who has the battle wounds that Johnny Sexton's had, who has the talent that he has, and Neil Francis' point is that Ireland wouldn't have been as successful without Sexton. There's no doubt that that's a very true statement.
But Timmy, just to interrupt you, sorry, he's the best managed player in the country because of his value. So if you look at 2021 and late 2020, Sexton effectively has played no rugby. He trained brilliantly by all accounts at Leinster, and then in the first game he was thrown into, which was Leinster-Munster the other week, he gets a muscle injury because of his age. I'm not really sure how you protect him, to be honest. You're either playing or you're not.
No, but that's the question, Joe. If he's not up to it, we shouldn't be playing him. I mean, let's be very clear. If he's not up to it, but if he is playing, what I'm saying is, you play him less. You even in the game against Wales, you don't play. We play him normally for 60 to 65 minutes. I'm not sure in his current state of physicality that's capable for him. So you play him for less time, okay? So that's one thing. You protect him as best you can, and obviously, Joe, in rugby, the protection is more limited than we say in NFL.
And so,
the other point,
so say you're 15 points apiece with Wales in Cardiff after 55 minutes.
I take him out.
Yeah, well, I mean,
but Joe,
I'm not sure you would. I'm not sure you would. No, Joe, honestly, I'm not sure you would. You have to win that game.
Okay, but Joe, well, first of all, as a former coach of club and country, I would take him out. If that's my plan, I would take him out.
Okay,
because you have to.
You massively risk losing that game then.
Because here's the key, for me as a coach, right? For me as a coach, here it's my philosophy that this is how I coach. This is how I put my team out, and I've got to have the courage, Joe, as the coach, and that's the big thing that I would question in many of the coaches. I've got to have the courage to stay with my conviction. And so I'll give you a good example. When I was coaching Tralee, the best player we had, the best Irish player, was a guy called John Tehan. And we played our first game against Neptune in the league with great expectations, and we got walloped. We got absolutely walloped. So our next big game was the following week was at home against St. Vincent's Dublin, who Tralee had never beaten. And John Tehan picked up an injury during the week. And we did a fitness test. Now, John Tehan will go through a wall for you, a bit like Johnny Sexton. And we had a fitness test with John Tehan. And I said to John, if you don't pass the fitness test, you are not playing. Now, at that time, my job was on the line, the pressure and all that. No, he passed the test, Joe. But I told John Tehan, if he didn't pass it, he wouldn't have played. Because you have to have a conviction. So I'm telling you, if I was the coach of the Irish team, and with 15 all, with 25 minutes to go, and my plan was to say Sexton out to protect him for the next week and the other games, I would take Sexton out.
Yeah, maybe. Look, I mean, each to their own. Very difficult. If John Tehan gives you the thumbs up and says, I'm feeling great and I'm playing well and 55 minutes are on the clock, leave me on here.
I did it, Joe. As a player in a cup final.
No, I
Joe,
believe you.
no.
I don't doubt you, but I just think this is a different situation, really. This isn't, somebody with a specific injury and they have to pass a fitness test. This is just somebody who's battling age a little bit. Like, there's every chance. Like, the week before the Munster game, actually, I think Sexton played 80 minutes, didn't he, at the RDS?
Yeah, he did.
Of 80 minutes.
He did.
Yeah. So he does have 80 minutes in him at times, and you lose to Wales.
It's not the same thing, though, Joe. With respect, 80 minutes in the Pro 14, with respect, is not the same as a game against Wales and Cardiff. Like, it is a step up. I mean, even though it
might be a step up, but he still picked up a niggle against Munster at Thomond Park. Like, if you're running, you're running. Neil Francis makes the point. Quite often he picks up a niggle just as a result of extending himself. Like, if you're sprinting, you're sprinting. I don't know. I just think it's a really difficult thing to put on a coach to say you need to protect. How can you say to any Farrell, you need to protect Sexton? I mean, it's just so hard to predict when someone's going to get injured.
But can I just develop one point? I do not agree with Francis's headline. I absolutely don't agree with that.
Well, it's not his headline, but
I know. I say so better, so I understand that. But I'm saying the headline of his piece.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I don't believe that our entire. I think at one point in time in Sexton's career it was critical, but I do believe that in a team game, it can't be just down to one person, irrespective of the talent that he has.
Yeah.
So to finish the point, then, Joe, you asked me about where we finish. I really believe that if we perform, because it's about performing. That's all. If we perform, we'll be in the shake-up for the championship at the end of this.
I hope you're right. The headline, by the way, on Neil Francis' piece is "Everything rests on Sexton's shoulders." But sorry, Gráinne, you were coming in.
No, sorry, the delay here. Just to come in as well on Shane McGrath had on his article, like, clouds hang over middling Ireland, and this is about Andy Farrell. But a point that I highlighted here was, but the Farrell era has been characterised by caution. His most important player remains Johnny Sexton, who will be 36 in the summer, and whose best days are behind him, according to Shane McGrath. That tends to be the way with rugby players in their mid-30s. But he talks then about the alternatives to the number 10s, like from the fitness difficulties of Joey Carberry to the impressions made by Ross Byrne and Billy Burns when they have been given a chance. But it would help, though, if form were at least acknowledged. The best performance by an Irish out-half in months was provided by Jack Carty in Connacht's victory over Leinster at the RDS, but he remains on the outside, though with Farrell's selections defended on the basis of the decision-making of Carty, as Connacht tried and failed to get a late try in defeat by Munster a week later. So that's kind of one of the things that stood out to me about that article as well. And also, I suppose, frustrations was another one too. I think that was a Shane McGrath piece here. Yeah, it was by Hugh Farrell. It was a common piece as well, which was frustration bubbles under as squad leaves sour taste. And I thought it was a really well written article. It was about kind of how you need to bite your tongue at times. And he looks at, like, horse racing Cheltenham Festival. He looks at the GAA managers as well, and talks in terms of 3-year deals and some managers getting paid for it. And then he talks about rugby as well, as it shares bite the tongue scenarios, beginning with the quality of its product itself. But one of the big things he's talking about here is he talks about here that while arguably rugby's biggest problem, the tongue-biting issue that intrigues most is national jerseys becoming a parody of what they are supposed to represent amid the continuing blight of imported players suppressing homegrown talent. And he's talking about Irish talent suffers while overseas journeymen maximise career dividends. And he gives the example of Jamison Gibson Park. Nothing against him, but he's in the Ireland Six Nations squad ahead of Luke McGrath and especially John Cooney, which is mind-boggling. So John Cooney is coming up again in this article as why he is not involved in the Irish side. And he also mentions Stuart McCluskey too, as an Ulster centre, who has only 4 caps over 5 years. Is very hard to justify. And how many more would McCluskey have next to his name were it not for Bundy Aki? So that's one of the themes as well of I suppose Jack Carty not getting on, John Cooney not getting involved in the squad too. That kind of caught my eye as well.
And what are your thoughts on that, Gráinne? Do you agree with the point?
It's kind of we're having this issue in GA, and I've been listening to the future of sport as well, as where you need to have players playing and being involved, and regardless of your talent, like if there's a player pathway, if people aren't involved in sport, they're going to leave out and not get involved. So, you know, you want the Bundyakis involved and the Jemson Gibson Parks because they are brilliant rugby players and they have been brought here and they've shown that for their club how brilliant that they are. But yet you have players that are from Ireland that have gone through the underage setups here who cannot get on the side. So personally, for me, I don't think that's fair. And I totally agree with the rule now that the 3-year rule I thought was very unfair. You have a 5-year rule now, which means you obviously have to stay here and get involved. And I do see the other side of the argument where you're now living here, you've set up your base here as a home, and you've spent 5 years to work in an Irish team, that's much better. But I do feel very sorry for the likes of John Cooney because he plays so well for Ulster, and it's like, what else does he have to do to put his hand up and get involved in this squad? And what are the reasons that he's not actually being brought on? Is it because there's something that the management don't see in him for potential, which he does for his province but doesn't do for the country? Does he need to be given more time? Like, what is it about him that he can't get on? And Jack Carty, I know, has had chances, but does he deserve another chance being involved? So I am a bit torn on this, I must say. I do feel desperately sorry for players that have come up through the ranks and that have been involved in this and are not getting a chance because other players have come in. I think it's better now for 5 years because it obviously means that they're here for a reason. The 3-year rule I thought was terrible. I just thought it was very, very unfair to Irish players that have been, and any player that's been gone through the under academy and player academy all the time. So I do think it's unfair.
Like Timmy, Hughes seems to be sort of making the point here when it's a close enough call, a la Jemson Gibson Park versus a Cooney or a Luke McGrath, that the Irish player should get the nod.
So I don't agree with that. I believe you picked the best player available to you. I have question marks about this residency situation of 3 years and even 5 years. I do have a question mark about that in essence. But if they do qualify, then you just pick your best players. And obviously Andy Farrell is picking his best players. So I would disagree with Gráinne the fact that if you serve underage at international level, that you're entitled because of that to get in front of somebody who now qualifies under the residency rule. But I do have great sympathy for people, who are Irish born and bred, and that players can come over. I mean, basically mercenaries in some ways you can call them, can come over to a country, spend 3 years as it was originally and 5 years as it was. Some of them stay, but they don't all stay. Other people go back, and they can use that to their own professional advantage, which is their right to do. So I do have a concern about that aspect of it, of the real desire to play for Ireland as regards the desire to play international from a professional contract point of view. But I do believe that if you're Farrell, you want to pick your best players. And that's why, Gráinne made a very good point earlier about Jack Carty. I mean, he has had an exceptionally good season, particularly in the game against Leinster. And he's completely gone off Andy Farrell's radar. So, we'll all have opinions who should be picked. Ultimately, it comes down to Farrell, who he wants to pick, and the structure he wants to play in that sense. But as regards the point of view, Farrell, is that there is huge frustration. I was fortunate enough to play for my country, and if I was playing for my country, when I played, what happened was if you had an American at the time who was to qualify, he would have to have a grandparent rule. There was a grandparent rule. You had to have an association with Ireland. In rugby, that doesn't matter. You can be associated with anywhere, and you can just be in a country for 3, or now as it is 5 years, and qualify for the country. So I have no issue with Andy Farrell picking who he wants to pick because they're qualified, and he picks them on his basis. But I do understand fully that if you're Cooney or the other guys, the frustration must be to see, with respect, guys coming who are really not good enough to make it in their own country, and now we're taking a spot where you could have at scrum half, and the frustration that would be. But if they're qualified, Joe, they're qualified, and that's the rules of the game.
Okay. Mike Brown, by the way, beside that, has a pretty good piece. We don't have to dwell on it, but it's very decent. He gives a nice insight into Eddie Jones. Talks about how innovative he is all the time, how after meeting Pep Guardiola and seeing how in amongst training Pep got, that Eddie started doing that as well. He'd get so involved with sessions, you'd see him getting smashed out of rucks by guys 3 times his size, or in team meetings, he has a tennis ball at all times and he'll just fire it at people and shout catch to make sure everyone's paying attention at all times. Or when they were about to play South Africa, he had, on the walk from the ground, from the dressing room to the training pitch, music blaring and all the staff wearing Springbok kits and shouting abuse at them in Afrikaans to try and get them in the mood. From an Irish rugby point of view, just a nice little reality check for us. Mike Brown picks his Lions 15. Number of Irish players in his Lions 15, 1. James Ryan. Otherwise, it's we're 0 for the other 14 when it comes to Irish players in Mike Brown's Lions 15. On James Ryan, by the way, Stuart Barnes makes the point in the Sunday Times. He's talking about players he's watching this year, and he talks about, he's looked great at doing the basics and all the rest. But he says, however, he has looked lightweight on the last couple of occasions against England. The much debated battle of the locks, Ryan against Itoje, has never materialised. He must find a new level of physicality against England. So sometimes the outside views in can be a bit more chastening. Just before we leave the Six Nations then, it's everywhere. We won't get through all the previews. This is most likely the last free-to-air Six Nations. Brendan Fanning's writing about that in the Sunday Independent on page 5. And, he's charting various aspects of the situation, the attempts in 03 and then Eamon Ryan's intent to get the Six Nations onto the A list, and how the RFU have generally campaigned against that, and they want it on the B list. They feel they'd be going into negotiations with one hand tied behind their backs if it was on the protected list. And so it seems like, I guess, a perfect storm of COVID and CVC coming in and Irish legislation not being where rugby fans might want it to be. Like in France, the Six Nations is protected, for instance. And it looks like this is going to happen. So the worry is, I suppose, Gráinne, what does it mean for the sport? Heineken Cup went behind paywall and survived just fine. I don't think the Heineken Champions Cup as it is now is in as good a place. So the Six Nations is almost like the crown jewels, really, and one of the great advertisements for the game. And so if that disappears from a million eyeballs in this country, it'll be a decade or more before we understand the consequences.
Yeah, I think it's important to have elements of your sport on free to air. I really do. And the reason it is, it's visibility. You have to be able to visibly see this. Now, I do think the whole COVID pandemic has changed how we view sport. We've got much more into streaming. It's become a lot more acceptable to pay your €5 or your €10 to watch a particular match, which we've done for a lot of GA games, which beforehand people would not have been happy to do that. So I think we have become a bit more acceptable and willing to do paying for actual sport that we can watch on a live stream. But it's interesting in the same article as well, Brendan Fanning, he just talks about the restricting the view, for example, the 20 by 20 movement to promote women in sport in this country used the "if she can't see it, she can't be it" slogan to make the point visibility is key. This observation was made repeatedly to the then ERC Chief Executive Derek McGrath back in the 03-04 season when he was taking the Heineken Cup from free to air to satellite in the shape of Sky. Never mind the natives first, he had to cam the sponsor. So it's like I can see where they are, because rugby is in a very perilous situation in terms of finance. So in one way that their hands are very much tied as well, because they need the money. And when they're going for that negotiation, everyone's aware around the table that they need this money to actually can keep the professional game afloat here in Ireland. But if you don't see it, if young people don't see the sport actually on television, does it become irrelevant? I mean, for a long time, golf, you couldn't see golf in free to air. Like, you have to have subscriptions to see golf. We've seen an upsurge in golf course now because of the pandemic. So I'm not sure if it's a great idea to have every part of your aspect on behind the paywall. I think you need to have a visibility on that. And I'm not sure in Ireland if they'll allow that to happen, the Six Nations to go and be paid, Joe. I'm not sure if the government will allow that to take place. So we will see what the result of that will be.
Yeah, Eamon Ryan was certainly shouted down in 2010 when he tried to look at putting it on the A list, and the RFU were first at his door to say, "Do not do this. Like, we need to keep the broadcasters honest." I think it is under review at the moment. Catherine Martin is looking at it. Paul Rouse had a very good piece a couple of weeks ago. We discussed it on the show, and he outlined the incredible fall off in viewing figures when you go from free to air to pay-per-view, which won't surprise anyone. And in certain demographics, it's especially huge. Like in rural Ireland in particular, the drop-off is absolutely enormous. And he posed the question to me. He said, why is rugby being treated so differently to Irish football, i.e. the Republic of Ireland matches are all protected, and to GAA, again, effectively all protected, all the marquee games. And he said, why is rugby different here? It seems in part because of rugby's own lobbying.
It does seem in part because of rugby's lobbying. I also think Gráinne's point is very, very valid. If you can't see it, it's very hard to get into it. And, you know, like Paul's piece a few weeks ago about the drop-off was staggering when you actually see it and in front of you. It was actually staggering that the drop off was so intense. It really was. It was, off a cliff edge. So I do believe that if from a rugby point of view, the RFU want money. So they're a professional organisation and they're looking to get money. So that's their agenda. So I'm not sure that they at the higher echelons in a professional sense have a real concern about it being lost to free to air. I'd have a real concern because I think that when you lose free to air, you lose the commonality, the community spirit that we talk about when pre-COVID and please God post-COVID, we meet up and chat about things in that sense, because not everybody is going to, as Paul Rose highlighted, is going to watch it if you have to pay for it. So I think it's a real challenge ahead now, and I would love the government to come out and protect it. I think that it's important. I think GA is important that it's protected. I think Irish soccer is important that it's protected. And rugby right now needs to be protected, because the danger is once you lose it, Joe, you don't get it back. These things have a habit of, once they're gone off free to air, it's very difficult to get them back. So I really hope that the government, step up, despite the lobbying that obviously it looks like it's going on from rugby, to actually keep this free to air, because that's very important.
It's funny, we had Matt Williams on a couple of weeks ago to discuss the Paul Rouse article, and he was saying in Australia, the paywall, in his opinion, massively damaged the popularity of the sport, and now it's come full circle. They are now getting it back free to air in a bid to try and re-engage with the youth of Australia, and that's a worrying prospect for Irish rugby, not least because the school system are so dominant, so that will always be the production line. But in terms of getting the interest of a Sean O'Brien, who probably watched Brian O'Driscoll's hat-trick on RTÉ at the time, or Tyke Furlong, or all these club players around the country, you would look at the landscape now. The World Cup is protected, so that will be free to air every 4 years. But otherwise, you're now looking at potentially Pro 14 is on air behind a paywall. It's on TG Car as well. I think the Irish language is a bit of a barrier, but it is on TG Cars. But English coverage, English language coverage. Pro 14 is on air. You have the Heineken Champions Cup on BT, which very few people in the country have. What else is there? You have Six Nations going potentially behind a paywall. So the only free-to-air games would be the 2 to 3 in the autumn. Otherwise, rugby could effectively disappear behind a paywall unless you've got Sky Sports or BT or whoever gets the Six Nations. There's one Champions Cup game per round on Virgin, but those rights are up as part of this current deal, so I don't know what's happening there. So I don't know. I mean, that's a kind of tricky prospect. It's a big leap to take, and the problem is you don't know till a decade on what the effect is. So we'll have to see. That's in page 5 of the Sunday Independent. Perfect storm, ready to rage. Brendan Fanning writing about it there. Future landscape is up for battle once again in the casino of broadcasting rights. Correspondent interviews, very interesting, from Australia. Timmy, she's talking about a few different things, not least the breech stack injury, I guess, because she was metres away from it when it happened.
I thought this was a brilliant piece, I have to say. First of all, I didn't realise he was the oldest player playing out there. That jumped off the page to me in that sense. And the fact that she's so successful is an amazing compliment to her. When you think that, she went out there at the latter part of her career. She's now the oldest player out there, and she's performing incredibly well despite the horrific injuries she had. She also talked about, as a Breed Stack, and how they've become friends and their journey, since Breed has gone out there. And obviously she talked about social media's impact on the events of a couple of weeks ago. But what I found interesting is that her grow for home came out for me a lot. That was interesting for me. So the fact that she's having a very successful time out there, she's recovered from her injury, and she's now back again performing at the level that she wants to. But she still talks with great affection about home. And I love that part, near the end of the piece, where she just talked about, she wants to come back and eventually get a full-time job. And, she was working with the Mayo Travellers project, and she does some media work from time to time. But she does want to come back eventually and get full-time employment. So here you have a great story of an Irish exile who was a phenomenal and probably the greatest women's football player of all time. Went out to Australia at the back end of her career, has took up a new sport, has become a star in a new sport, and yet at the end of all this, she still loves to come home. And that, to me, when we talked earlier on about 3-year and 5-year residency rules in the rugby, That's what Irishness is to me, Joe. She actually exudes it there. You know, she's going to go abroad, do her stuff, but she's coming home because she's Irish. I thought it was a brilliant piece about Cora Staunton.
As she talks about the breech stack injury as well, doesn't sound pleasant, as you can imagine. You know by the screams, they were horrendous. They brought me back to the time I broke my leg. You know when someone screams like that, it's serious. I was with her within 5 seconds of the injury. I knew straight away it was very serious, as did the medical team, as did the paramedics when they arrived. She was very unlucky, but she was very lucky at the same time with regards to the injury. Another millimetre and it could have been a lot more serious. She has some nerve damage in her arm, does not have full power, but the outcome is a lot more positive than it was in the first couple of hours. And you know, potentially here we're talking paralysis is what Cora Staunton says, Gráinne. And could you just imagine if that had happened? It would have been utterly tragic.
Utterly tragic. And just to mention, on Saturday, the Irish Examiner, Breach Stack, actually wrote a really well-written article, and the headline was sobering to think being paralysed or not came down to millimetres. And it was really well written in that it was a very honest, very raw insight to how she was feeling. You can feel the hurt and the anger and the frustration that she felt just by affects it as well. So she obviously was very, very lucky and realises that. And as Cora mentioned, that article in the Irish Mail. But just to quote just something from the Irish Examiner as well, she basically sitting down to watch the second half of the game, just about the appeal then for Ebony Marinoff's tribunal appeal for her 3-month ban for the challenge with fractured breech stack's neck. And basically she's clear. So she just says, my heart just sank. I broke down in tears. Within minutes, my teammate Cora Staunton, Alicia, the team captain, and our head coach, Alan McConnell, were in the apartment trying to console me. I was beside myself with anger, disillusionment. I felt so totally disheartened by the outcome. And basically, one of the things in social media, I think as well, and we could talk all day about the effects of social media, but the angles and cameras. So there was one particular angle of the camera that showed the particular instance that we all saw on social media. But there was a second camera, I think, as she mentioned, the tribunal had access to a second camera angle, which showed that her feet were planted, that I had my head over the ball. Because what had happened, I think, was everyone had initial sympathy and then social media and started commenting, well, actually, she turns out to be the villain rather than the victim. And I think that really impacted her. And she said as well, the trial by social media over here has left a really bitter taste in my mouth. The Crows had every right to appeal the original 3-match ban, but some of the evidence in their argument was laughable. The trial suggests that I got injured in the first quarter. And then she talks about the support from Ireland. So I think herself and Cora, they would have obviously marked each other and would have had many massive battles throughout the years in Ireland. But I think they've become really great friends as well. They would have been friends here, but really great friends. And you can see the respect that she has and her husband as well. And they were saying how very lucky they had to have Cora around to help them. So I think it's massively disappointing for her, because it's such a dream to go over to play semi-professional life over in Australia, see some of the country that you can. It's a lot different in terms of COVID measurements there at the moment than they are here. So you have a lot of sense of freedom there as well. And then for this to happen, and it's very doubtful whether she will play, but I know Breach personally, I know how strong will she is, and she will do absolutely everything to see that she can get back before the end of the season. But it's really disappointing the way everything's worked out, but you can say it's been very lucky as well that things could have been so much worse than that. So it's talks, that article I enjoy about Michael Clifford is talking about Breach as well, but then Cora as well. Just what I always find about Cora Staunton is just the dedication she has. Like some of the things what she says here is, I struggle to fill my downtime. I think this is a big part of the reason why I'm still playing. They're very much here about managing the load and not overtraining. It's the thing that I still struggle the most with. And then she talks about in this environment, which is a professional environment, because she's not working because you can't work there as you don't have the visas to work. So in this environment, she says, like a sugar crazed kid in a sweet shop, she can't stop sampling what's available. So she breathlessly lays out a typical training regime for pre-season that sees training 4 days a week, a cocktail of massages, physio, video analysis, team meetings, 2-hour pitch sessions, 1-hour gym routines, recovery ice baths, and finally reluctantly go home. And then she does optional stuff herself, like, going on upper body work and a bike session here and there. So totally driven to be the best athlete that she can. And at 39 years of age, like, it is phenomenal. And I think as well, what struck me too about it is that she's getting more into a mentoring role as well, Joe, which, I think there's so much you could learn from Cora Sutton. And I'm delighted to see that the club have got her involved in that as well, because I think young girls growing up, like she's such an icon to young girls and boys in this country and now in Australia as well, that they can see her and actually learn from her as well. So really good article, really enjoyed hearing that about Cora, and as Timmy was saying, which was good too, like I could never see myself letting Carnacon down and not playing for them as long as I'm able to. So it's, as we all say here in the GA world, it starts with the club and it most certainly ends with the club for her too. Yeah, it was a lovely article.
There was loads in it. Good to get a sense of where the women's game is over there. So Michael Clifford was writing that last year the average attendance across 48 games was 4,500, and then this season for the first time supporters are going to be charged for tickets and the price will be a nominal $10. But it's the league's first tentative steps towards self-sustainability and full-time professionalism, and they're looking to sell the TV rights in the next couple of years as well. So that's where the league is. I mean, look, Cora's just, like, it's nuts. She made her debut for Mayo at 13 years old. That's what she had to kind of, I think it was 1995 when she made her Mayo debut. She broke her tibia and her fibula at the age of 37. Like, at that point, any normal person goes, right, that's kind of me done. And here she is at 39, still going strong. I must say, I hadn't heard or read of Red Breed Stack's interview or her upset at the appeal being overturned, the challenge by Marinoff. And Cora's talking here about other angles as well. Because I have to say, and geez, I only wish Breed Stack the very best. But I didn't think Ebony Marinoff did all that much wrong. Looking at the footage I saw, it did look innocuous. When I heard her ban had been overturned, I kind of thought, yeah, I sort of see that. So, look, obviously they feel she has done something seriously wrong in the way she approached the tackle. Yeah,
and I think, well, there was a second camera angle that I haven't seen either, but this is what Breed has written in her article. And so basically the tribunal had access to a second camera angle. And as I mentioned before, so... And she mentions here as well, like the biggest issue in the AFL repeatedly stressed is that the duty of care lies with the player who chooses to bump or tackle, no matter the opponent's position. Yeah. So Marinoff's tackle, she said, was much more than a footy collision, and trying to justify it as such only further underlines why high tackles are so dangerous in sport.
Okay, fair enough. Timmy, Frank Lampard caught your eye?
Yeah, well, I'm a Chelsea fan, Joe, so it definitely caught my eye in more ways than one.
How miserable is it to support Chelsea? I was talking about this during the week. What is the point of supporting Chelsea anymore, Timmy? Like, I mean, can you get excited about the Thomas Tuchel era knowing it won't last more than 18 months? Like, is there any point in investing in any of these managers with your heart and with your soul? You must crave what other clubs have, where they can at least go on a 4, 5, 6 year journey with a manager, and there's a bit of possibility of something. Because at Chelsea, I mean... Conte wins the title, gets the sack. Mourinho wins the title, gets the sack. Bar Jose, no Chelsea manager has got more than 2 years since Jose's first stint. That must, as a Chelsea fan, be a little bit pointless. You must last year with Lampard and Tammy and Mason Mount and all the kids coming through have thought, there's something with a bit of heart maybe blossoming here. And then Chelsea revert to type. Admit it. Admit it's miserable. I refuse to believe you're enjoying it.
Okay, first of all, it's not miserable being a Chelsea fan. Secondly, I'm a lifelong Chelsea fan, and I actually blame George Best actually for becoming a Chelsea fan, because when I saw back when I was a youngster, Manchester United won the European Cup. And then a few years later, because it was a one-channel television, at that time you'd see the European Cup final, the Cup Winners' Cup final, this is before your time, Joe, in your time growing up, the Fairs Cup, and you see the FA Cup final, and that was the only exposure to soccer. So a couple of years then, I was very young at the time, so I saw this team win the Champions or the European Cup. Then I saw another team win the FA Cup against Leeds, and the thing that was similar was the team wore navy blue, because United won navy blue when they beat Benfica. So I thought the team in navy always won. So that's why I started following Chelsea. And then for many years I realised, oh my God, that's really not true. This team doesn't win. And I was a season ticket holder at Joe for about 4 years. So I used to go across my two sons every 2 year, every second Saturday. And it was from the Claudio Ranieri era right through to Mourinho. So I actually crossed that divide in that sense. So I went from so I was at the start of the Abramovich era in the sense of his introduction to Chelsea. So as a Chelsea fan, like their philosophy is basically, the managers are irrelevant. It's the players we want, and we basically have We can hire managers and fire managers, and we want the players. And their success since Abramovich has come in, is not in question. From a Lampard point of view, personally, because obviously of his success as a player, I like the style of football he was bringing into Chelsea. But I did think, Joe, as a Chelsea fan, he had lost his way a couple of weeks ago. I thought to myself, he just had lost his mojo. He just seemed to have run out of ideas in a sense. So I said to my two sons a few weeks ago, he'll get sacked. There's no questions he's going to get sacked. And this is consistent with the Chelsea philosophy. So to just challenge one point, not every club in England, keep managers for a long time. I mean, obviously, United have Solskjaer at the moment, but they went through post-Ferguson a range of managers. Liverpool seem to be the exception, in fairness, and I think they've got to get great credit for staying. But as a Chelsea fan, I'm not miserable at the fact that we sack managers every year or two. They're professionals. I was talking to my mother-in-law the other night, and I made a point. She was saying, it's very sad. I said, he'll walk away with about 10 million quid now in his back pocket. So don't feel that bad for him in that sense. But from a Chelsea point of view, I do believe that the Tuchel era will be just another era. As you say, Ancelotti won a double, he was sacked. Mourinho won titles, he was sacked. We won the Champions League under Di Matteo, he was sacked. So it's just their philosophy. And I think the important thing for me when I see Chelsea manager being appointed as Tuchel is appointed now, it's a timing issue. It's just a timing issue. What's clear about Chelsea is they're very comfortable with that. Other managers go into clubs and believe they're going to be there for life, and they're not, Joe.
Yeah, it's interesting to get your perspective, because as a neutral observer, Sam Wallace's piece is good here in the Sunday Independent, where interestingly he says that in Lampard's 18 months, he didn't talk with Abramovich once, which just blew my mind. I mean, it's an odd situation there. But I guess you look for something to get your teeth into with a team, to follow, to watch, for want of a much better word, the narrative evolve in a way. And sort of felt with Chelsea, Mourinho came and 04 to 07 and created something really powerful and interesting, and then effectively even right through until the Champions League win in 12, it was still Mourinho's team. It was still the spine. It was Terry, it was Lampard, it was Drogba, a lot of the same characters. And just since their retirements, the increased turnover of player and the increased turnover of manager, just kind of think, well, what are Chelsea? Do you know what I mean? There's nobody kind of I'm not interested in watching over the next 5-6 years. I'm not really that worried about Pulisic, that way.
Yeah, it's interesting about the Mourinho era, because as I said, I was there, and what people sort of forget now, Joe, looking back, he brought 4-3-3 to England.
Yeah.
He changed the whole style of football in England, and it took, in fairness to Ferguson, it took him a couple of years to catch up, and then he caught up with it, and United started playing that. So Mourinho brought so much to England, and obviously so much to Chelsea, and he brought a new spirit at that point now, and he brought obviously success. And what seemed to happen in Chelsea, because obviously I go over there regularly still, John. I'm no longer a season ticket holder, but I go there regularly and bring my children and grandchildren there. So I still have great love for the club, is the manager has become irrelevant. And that's actually the thing that Chelsea are very clear about.
Yeah.
The manager is actually not relevant. It's, we're going to buy or grow, but particularly buy, the best players we can buy. And we're going to get a manager to try and get the best out of them. And as long as he's doing that, he's okay, but as soon as he doesn't do it, we'll get a new manager in.
No, I get that, but when you lose the Lampard, Terry, Drogba identity, what are you left with? Like, who's the marquee Chelsea player for you now? Who defines Chelsea?
Well, okay, so I'll answer the question, but just to pick up the point.
Yeah.
We lost leaders. There were three leaders in different ways, okay? Particularly Terry and Lampard and Drogba, but particularly Terry. They were great leaders in the dressing room. And when I look at Chelsea now, okay, I say to myself, we don't have any leaders. I'm looking to say, who's going to pull this game out of the fire for us when we're really struggling?
Yeah.
And there's nobody there. So there's no heart of Chelsea as we got used to with the Terry, Lampard and Drogba. And that's what I believe is missing in Chelsea. I mean, they talk about Thiago Silva. Like, Silva doesn't speak apparently very good English. So, he's obviously a very talented player. But he doesn't have, and he could be the heart, but he just doesn't have enough of the skills. So when I look at Chelsea, the heart of Chelsea for me is Azpilicueta, but he's at the end of his career. So that's what they're missing, Joe. They're missing a heart in the sense of a leader who's going to grab this team, a Roy Keane who's going to grab this team when it's struggling, like the night against the famous night for Keane against Juventus, when it's struggling, when it's going nowhere. and he single-handedly pulls it out. Chelsea don't have that right now. For all the talent they have, because they have a lot of talent, young and old, they don't have that. And if you look at the player who probably has that ability in the sense internally is Jorginho. He just doesn't have the legs to get around the game in England that they would need. So he probably was the one player, Joe, that could have brought that leadership. The problem is he just doesn't have the physical ability and pace to get around the game in the Premiership. So that takes him out of it. But they're missing the heart. And then what you have is at the top, at boardroom level, at chief executive level, they're just ruthless. And I thought the point about Abramovich didn't speak to Lampard shocked me, Joe, as a Chelsea fan.
Yeah,
that really couldn't believe that. I said, oh my God, that's... and also then, okay, in the sense of Gráinne, she actually likes Lampard, so apparently she actually spent a bit more time, but she didn't want him. And I think that was the most telling piece about Sam Wallace's article. She didn't want Lampard. They were stuck to get him at a point in time. The other people they had on their radar probably weren't available, Joe. So I think that, you know, from the start, the emotion and the jubilation and the joy of getting a legend, the top scorer in the history of Chelsea, which is incredible from a midfield point of view, all that emotion and tidings and good tidings towards him carried him on for a period. He did a great job last year getting a top 4 spot. But the pressure came on when you have to move on from that. And, you know, people talk about the 225 million Joe Chelsea spent. I mean, they got 160 for Hazard and they got 70 for Morata. So they actually spent less than they got for those two players. But it was the fact that they didn't evolve as a team. And, you know, that's where I think that, you know, Lampard struggled. And there was, I think when we also talk about the Gerrard piece, you know, by Oliver Holt in the Mail, the comparison, because in their playing career, they were compared. And in their managerial careers, they're going to be compared. And I just think it's interesting that, you know, Gerrard's gone off to Rangers and has stayed a bit longer than obviously Lampard did at Derby. And that may help him if he does come back to Liverpool. But he'll have the same emotional benefits when he comes back to Liverpool, as is likely he will. But he'll have the same challenges as Lampard. The difference will be, I believe, for Gerrard coming back to Liverpool when he does, he'll have had more experience than Lampard has. So I'm sad to see Lampard get sacked from a point of view of a Chelsea supporter. But it's, you know, as regards Chelsea and managers, that's their philosophy. I don't lose any night's sleep over that. What I lose night's sleep over is when we lose games or draw to really poor teams. I lose about that. But as regards the managers, Joe, I have a very simple view of Chelsea's managers. They pay them really well. They reward them really well if they win. And they sack them really quickly if they don't. And once you understand that's the rule of the game, Ancelotti said that to Lampard, and he said on TV last week, we know every time we sign a contract, we're going to get sacked. Except at Chelsea, when you sign a contract, you get paid really well, but you still get sacked.
I thought it was actually shocking, like in the Sunday Times, that talking about Roman Generals, like this is the 10th Chelsea manager to have his contract terminated early during the 18 years of the Abramovich era. And he's paid 110.5 million in payouts. Like, that's shocking. 110.5 million. Like, what that money could actually buy is just unbelievable. But when Timmy's talking there about leaders, like, that's kind of the thrust of David Walsh's article in the back page of the Sunday Times as well. And I just thought it was really interesting, you know, in terms of Roy Keane and the exchange that he had, and that's what he references here, David Walsh, Roy Keane and Jamie Carragher in last year when Liverpool beat Man United 2-0 at Anfield, and they were now 16 points ahead, and Man United were 30 points behind. And Jamie Carragher was saying that basically Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wasn't good enough to manage United, and Keane was like, you know, just give him one more year, the season's not over yet. And Keane started talking about Guardiola and Klopp's underwhelming first seasons in the Premier League too, and how long would you give Ole? Carragher asked Keane, he says, well, I'd give him another year, 100% another year. And basically giving him more time. Like this is, but I think, you know, this is something at Chelsea, they don't do more time. They just get someone in if they haven't performed in 18 months. Like even managers that have been really successful, they've got rid of them anyhow because they just didn't like their face anymore. Maybe they were just looking for things that they weren't happy with. But that leadership thing, you know, that they don't seem to have those leaders in Chelsea at the moment. And so Lampard, having that inexperience, who does he turn to? Who does he actually have to help him become a better manager? And he's only been in Derby for a very short time before he moved here. So they're looking for leaders as well. And Roy Keane, it was funny that he prophetically said as well against when they lost Man City that basically he would love Lampard to get more time, but he fearful that he wouldn't because Chelsea don't give manager times. That's their DNA. And he wasn't wrong with that. So it's what I also thought was interesting about the Sam Wallace piece in the Irish Independent. Marina, is it Granaskaya, the number 2 for Abramovich, which I thought was that it showed that she really liked him and that she was present when she was going to fire him, which I thought was really interesting, because they were saying, well, if she didn't like him, she wouldn't be there to fire him, which just shows, it's just that's the thing. She didn't want him, but she liked him. The fans liked him. He's a huge favourite among Chelsea. It didn't work out, and they didn't give him time. And I suppose I've read somewhere as well, they're talking about David Moyes as well. He has to go away and learn. David Moyes was a really good manager with Everton, did not work out for Man United, but look where West Ham are at the moment. So do you become a bad manager overnight? You need to get your trade in, and it'll be interesting to see where Frank Lampard goes next. But I think it was a job he had to take. It's very difficult when you're offered this position. You have to take it. It was like David Moyes getting that job with Man United. These jobs don't come around very often. And unfortunately for him, it didn't work out. Whereas when you see that article then that we see in the Daily Mail with Steven Gerrard, Rangers were patient. They wanted him there, and he has leaders on that pitch. He's a good setup behind him. I think he's not even entertaining the idea of going to Anfield, but obviously that's something I'm sure that he would love to do in the future. His family are still there, so he'd like to go back there. So it's just interesting in talking about time and patience. Chelsea don't have it. So I don't know, the managers just need to look for a team that have patience, that are going to give you a 4-year contract like Liverpool, but it ain't going to happen at Chelsea, and I think everyone that joins knows that. Yeah,
it's true. And to be fair, it works. That, and in a way, that's the most worrying aspect of the whole thing, that it's mercenary culture at its most refined. They've got it down. And if every team is behaving like Chelsea in 10, 20 years' time, I'm not sure football will be in a great place. Timmy, you want a bit of room for a touch of romance about the thing, or heritage about the thing, even if it's easy to dismiss those things as of a bygone era, because there's a human aspect that we need to connect to when it comes to teams we support.
I think that's a very good point about the romance, and I think that when you look at Chelsea, I have great romance with Chelsea, and the highs and the lows that I've experienced right through my life. At one stage, Joe, winning the Zenit Data or the full Members' Cup was a highlight for me in the 80s for Chelsea, when Liverpool were winning Champions Leagues or European Cups, as they were calling it, for fun. So I've always enjoyed the journey with Chelsea. But what I've learned to come to terms with under the Abramovich area is it's just more pronounced, the sacking managers. They sacked Ancelotti in the tunnel at Everton. Okay, so it's just where, if you look at all other clubs, with the exception of Arsenal in the Wenger era, with the exception of United, and definitely Liverpool stand out from this, all other clubs are sacking people all over the place. But Chelsea are just more ruthless about it, because if you're successful or not at Chelsea, you get sacked.
Yeah.
If you're successful with other clubs, they keep you on. And so for me, what I miss, I was talking to a very good friend of mine, another Chelsea fan, when Lampard was sacked. He said they'll appoint Terry. I said they won't appoint Terry. I said, they'll appoint somebody who's, they were probably after Tuchel, a couple of years ago.
They were. They'd had a meeting with him before.
Yeah. So, and here's an interesting thing I read during the week is that, when Lampard, who was a brilliant professional, and really, we talked about Cora Staunton earlier about her training program that Gráinne took us through earlier. Lampard was the same. He'd stay behind after training all the time, right throughout his professional career. When he was at West Ham, he was sent on loan to Swansea, and, he was all the time the first person in for training and the last person out. And that carried on right throughout his Chelsea career. So he was a guy who did everything he could. Tuchel in his 20s got injured, and he paid that price to learn to be a coach. So, look, the romance, I love Chelsea. I love soccer, and I love watching it. And, the sad thing is that when a manager signs a contract at Chelsea and in most other clubs, they're going to get sacked. The thing about Chelsea is, as Gráinne highlighted, they're prepared to spend over £100 million sterling on doing it. So, that's where the romance gets challenged for me, Joe, in the sense of, oh my God, why are we spending all this money on just sacking guys, But the thing about it is that Abramovich doesn't seem to, in his business career and in his definitely in the ownership of Chelsea, doesn't seem to have any time for longevity in relationships. It's just do the job, get paid well, and then sadly, when we decide it's time for you to go, you go. So it loses a bit of romance if you get caught into that. But I can just tell you, Joe, as a Chelsea fan, I will still watch them. I've recorded the game with Burnley that's going on today. I'll watch it later on, and I'll be as passionate as ever. And so to answer the question you started this journey with, am I excited about the Tuchel area? I'm excited about Chelsea and whoever leads them, because it's not like GA. I mean, I coached St. Bridget's this year in Roscommon to win the senior football championship. And it's, as Gráinne highlighted earlier, it's the Paris, it's your communities where I live. And even though it was a COVID era, the buzz for me and the pride I have in being coach of a senior football team, part of a management team under Benny O'Brien, was just exceptional. So that's the community. That's what really I love about it. But at professional level, they come and go, Joe. And at Chelsea, they go more quickly. But thankfully for me as a fan, we win a lot along the way.
Soulless there. Timmy McCarthy. Shocked. Right, we're out of time. Thanks so much. Timmy McCarthy, former Irish basketball player, captain and manager, commentator at various Olympic Games as well for RTE, and Gráinne McElwain as well, broadcaster with TG Carr and RTE and Sky Sports. Thanks so much, guys. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.